It's Thursday, June 5th in 2022, 10 Central European Time. This is EuroWars, your independent breakdown of politics and money in the so-called European Union. My name is Paul Brandenburg, coming to you from our studio in Switzerland. And with me from Mallorca is my anonymous co-host to share his 30 years of experience in C-level banking around the globe, Hermann. Hermann, thanks for being here.
Hello, Paul.
Our headlines this week. Retaliation inbound after NATO-aided attacks on Russia. Poland and Bulgaria rise against EU. Germany continues to fuel migrant invasion. We experienced something in the last days that the Swiss-based newspaper Neue Zürcher Zeitung calls Russian Pearl Harbor. Ukraine launches a spectacular attack against air bases deep in the Russian hinterland, so the NZZ. Not only that this took place, they also attacked a Crimea bridge a few days later, which Russia called a red line in this war. The NZZ writes, the Ukrainian Secret Service dealt a heavy blow to the Russian Air Force on the eve of the second round of talks in Istanbul. Several bombers were destroyed in a long-planned operation. And at the same time, Germany's Minister of Defense, Boris Pistorius, comes out saying that he is willing to lead if others are now backing out of the Ukraine war. In the Berliner Zeitung, a regime-close newspaper based in Berlin, writes that despite the lack of commitment from Washington, Pistorius raises hope for U.S. aid for Ukraine, and he announces that Europe and Germany will step into the breach in case of doubt. Hermann, it seems as if everything is not only going to full-fledged war with the aid of NATO allies within the EU at least, but that Germany also doubles down on what it calls Kriegswirtschaft.
Absolutely, Paul, and I think it's a very dangerous situation because it's not only the warmongering and the acceptance of, we provoke Russia more and more. The Germans are back in taking the lead and being the leader, and we have a bad experience with that, and a lot of Germans have this slogan, nie wieder, or never again, and I think everything that we should have learned in the last 80 or 85 years or 90 years is out the window, and basically I have no idea why. If I remember when I was young and I went to school, it was basically part of the DNA to be told this can never happen again. We should never be in the possession of any.
And you such as myself, we're both West Germans. So we were born and raised in the American zone of West Germany.
Exactly. And where I come from, we have a U.S. air base close by. And so this was part of, being with the Americans and growing into a Wirtschaftswunder, so basically an economical miracle after everything was destroyed. And sometimes you have to think for yourself, what is the leadership of Germany up to? I mean, do they really want to destroy everything to rebuild it? And it's mind-blowing, the kind of comments, the kind of warmongering. The politicians are absolutely in a state of mind that they think they really can provoke Russia to a degree where they would not retaliate. And I think we should be careful because the Russian, one of the Russian military experts already said, we know where you produce these long-range missiles, and it could be that definitely this would be destroyed if we come to a situation where it's not bearable anymore. And I think, keeping the people in fear is not the right tactics. We have to stay clear-minded. And if we look at our political leaders that we have in Germany, there is no room for diplomacy because they say Russia has to end the war and Russia has to retreat from Ukraine, and that is the kind of diplomacy, and we all know it's not going to work.
Not only that, you're absolutely right. It's not only that they say Russia needs to retreat, they're actually going a step further. We just heard from U.S. President Donald Trump that Putin is not willing to cease fire right now, which is actually not a surprise if we take the fact into account that Ukraine there's absolutely no way that Ukraine managed to conduct these attacks without the aid of other NATO countries. So this was clearly a NATO attack, and while there's obvious retaliation that will will take place from Russia. The question is, how will this retaliation look? And German leaders that you just mentioned are not only insisting on Russia to instantly start with the ceasefire. No, they're actually going a lot further. A Swiss daily Weltwoche tells us this, that breaking off diplomatic relations is what they're now demanding. Roderich Kiesewetter wants to expel all Russian diplomats from Germany. Now, you could go, who the fuck is Roderich Kiesewetter? The guy is a senior member of parliament for the ruling CDU party. He is a colonel, a full colonel of the German army Bundeswehr, and is one of the most fierce advocates for war against Russia. Kiesewetter said, so Daily Weltwoche, some have already been sent away, meaning Russian diplomats, but there is still a need for action. Kiesewetter is not specific, but presumably he means all of them. There's a term for this, breaking off diplomatic relations. That is what the Swiss newspaper writes. In other words, countries no longer talk to each other. It comes to blows, first verbally, then physically. And at the same time, the chairman of the German Armed Forces Association, Mr. Wüstner, has spoken out in favor of increasing the number of German troops from around 180,000 right now up to 260,000. The Bundeswehr definitely needs to be larger than the 200,000 troops that were the target figure before the so-called pandemic, Wüstner told the German Redaktionsnetzwerk Deutschland, which is an SPD political party, Social Democrat-led media outlet, another state media organization. Hermann, Chancellor Friedrich Merz recently said that he wants to have, quote, the biggest land force in Europe. Meaning, if you take that literally, that he wants to have an army force in Germany again, larger than even the Russian army, because Russia also belongs to Europe, meaning that the Bundeswehr would actually have to grow to over 1.3 million soldiers. They're going for full-fledged war.
Absolutely. And the question is, right now, they still say the military service is voluntary, but you can imagine, and if they stick to these numbers, obviously it's going to be mandatory. So also,
and they said that, right? Merz already said that.
And also that's a warning for my 15-year-old son, because he will be registered. And we know in modern warfare how long a soldier lasts at the front line, between 4 and 7 hours. So if you want to lose your kids, and Merz explicitly said it's for women and young men. So basically he wants to include the girls as well. And here we can only use a metaphor that is out there, is weak men create tough times. And exactly at that point is where we are. We need strong men, but unfortunately our education system really breeds half men. If I say this so hard, is who should defend Germany? And the bigger question is, why should you defend this kind of bestes Deutschland aller Zeiten, so the best Germany we ever had? And you see...
That's the term, sorry, that is the propaganda term that they actually use. That's, again, not a joke. The best Germany of all times. It was coined by Angela Merkel, the horror chancellor Germany had, the one who opened the borders in 2015 and started the flood of invaders. That's what she coined, and they actually use this term time and again to describe what they believe is the best Germany of all times right now.
Absolutely. And this is the state of mind. I think there is even a word in English that is a German word, is Größenwahn. So basically what they are is they think in the superior, German leading the way. We need to be the leaders, not only in climate change and in the Energiewende, so the change of energy, the way we look at solar. Now we need to do it in military as well. And the big question is, who with? With the 1.5 million 13 to 30-year-old migrants that we just imported into Germany, do you think somebody who's running from Somalia and from any country in the world that has a kind of political trouble, they would come here, got a weapon, and they defend Germany? Because of what? I'm not defending Germany, and I can tell you why. Because this country and this German leadership has nothing to do with what I grew up with. And if you say in a discussion, in a public discussion today, you are against war, people are absolutely going at your throat. And
yes.
Funnily enough, there is...
Because you're a vulgar pacifist, yeah, that is aiding Putin's cause.
Exactly. You're a Putinist, you're a Putin Knecht. So basically you are a slave of Putin, you get paid by Putin. The obsession is so big that we really have to analyze what the psychology is. I mean, obviously, it's not clear thinking. It's not common sense what we do here, because Merz will go, I think he's visiting Donald Trump today. And of course, he's going to be, advocating for Germany should be the leader in any kind of defense manufacturing. We have now Volkswagen, who just fired 20,000 people, or basically 20,000 people left Volkswagen, the biggest shedding of employees ever. And therefore they think, you know what, we have Rheinmetall, which is like our German Lockheed and a German Halliburton. Basically, they would take over, and so many people can have a job in the defense, or actually in the war industry.
Actually, it's an offense industry, yeah.
Exactly. And so the danger is imminent. And here, a cry for help to the States. I mean, obviously, Donald Trump cannot have a high opinion of Friedrich Merz, even if he was the head of the supervisory board for BlackRock in Germany. But he will look at him and go, what the hell are you doing here? I mean, let's hope he sits on the same seat than Zelensky and gets told that he has to stop this absolute aggression towards Russia, because I think they are torpedoing knowingly all the efforts that Steve Witkoff, the chief negotiator from Donald Trump, is trying to achieve in the Ukraine, where he at least brings the people towards a table to talk to each other. And we have so many examples in Germany where great political leaders always said, you know, we rather talk 10 hours than having one shot or shooting one missile. And I can only agree with that, but that seems to be the minority, or actually, given that we have a public or state media that are warmongering as well. So it seems always that people are against the war are in the minority, which I don't believe the Germans are actually geared for war. But what you said is, if we go to 1.3 million army, that's impossible. It's just, I come from an economic background, is like, who in the hell did that spreadsheet?
Well, you just mentioned Friedrich Merz being in Zelensky's chair right now, and German media has been going crazy about this visit a couple of days now. One has to understand, and we always have to repeat that about 80% of German media is more or less state-sponsored. Our biggest TV stations are actually state-run. They are financed not by direct taxes, but by so-called obligatory payments people have to make. It's around 20 euros a month every German citizen has to pay for the state-run TV and radio stations. Again, not a joke. And the largest private media outlets, the legacy media outlets, are heavily sponsored by the states, such as the biggest German tabloid Bild. And Bild gives us this headline here while Friedrich Merz is on his way to Donald Trump: "Beware of J.D. Vance." That is the big title of Bild these days, because they are afraid that Friedrich Merz will suffer a similar fate like Mr. Zelensky did in the Oval Office. Bild, being the biggest officially critical newspaper or privately run tabloid, is giving Mr. Merz advice, because they do fear what you just said, that Merz will just sink like a brick if he gets the chance to step before the press with Donald Trump and or J.D. Vance. And that would be entertaining. We will see what's going to happen there. That will be something for our next week's episode. But while obviously Germany is yet again on the rise against Russia, and obviously preparing for war against Russia, Poland and Bulgaria are also on the rise against the EU. Because in Poland, they just had Polish presidency elections, and the Deutschlandfunk, a German state-run TV and radio station, writes, "Right-wing nationalist Nawrocki becomes new Polish president. Congratulations and fears from Germany." The right-wing nationalist has won the presidential runoff elections in Poland. According to the Electoral Commission, he received just under 51% of the vote. His opponent, Trzaskowski, has conceded defeat. Fears are being voiced in Germany that the atmosphere between the two countries could deteriorate. That is their headline, and one has to understand that this TV station, just state-run as I said, is conveying the fears from the German regime. Because at the same time, Polish people, if you take a look into free media, Polish people voice their fears of their country, quote, turning into Germany. So what we are seeing there is quite interesting, Hermann, because after this new president, this anti-EU or this EU-critical president has been voted into office, the Prime Minister of Poland, who is a former EU functionary, Donald Tusk, one of the most intense advocates for more EU control over Poland, he just announced that he will hold a Misstrauensvotum in Germany, so a vote of confidence in his government, because he fears that he is now blocked from continuing what he calls reforms to tie Poland closer to the EU.
Thank you to the Polish people, is all I can say. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the Polish people and their economical development in the last couple of years is nothing short of stunning. And you can really feel it. You and I spent from time to time a few days in Berlin. And what we saw there is that a lot of people from Eastern Europe, especially Poland, come to Berlin to basically work. And it's getting less and less because the economical miracle in Poland, and if you look at Warsaw or Krakow or something, is really in a state where they are growing and people feel better off. They are wealthy. That means they have no idea to support the EU because they have seen what happens to other countries. I mean, look at Croatia, for example. They were celebrating like Bulgaria is just in front of the introduction of the euro, and therefore the inflation went through the roof. So basically, this is something that they have to keep in mind. And if we talk about Poland, look, the clear announcement that the political leadership before Donald Tusk said, do you know why we don't have knife stabbings here? Because we don't have migrants. We don't take him. Do you think we should take him? No, we leave him to you. And basically, so there's a clear stand. And also, I think these people understand they have to defend themselves from Russia because they had this bad history in being part of the Warsaw Bloc. So basically, the conglomerate of nations dominated by the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And I think out of this, they know how it feels to have an economy that is starting to thrive. And if we look at Bulgaria, you know that they say, oh my God, you are allowed to introduce the euro. And therefore, I looked at it and I said, but if I remember out of banking, we have dealt with Bulgaria. And in 1997, they had a hyperinflation in 1996. So in 1997, there was a new currency order and they pegged the Bulgarian liv, their currency, to the Deutschmark. And therefore, the effect of the euro that we see now, they have in the last 20, 30 years because they were pegged to the German Deutschmark. So if they introduce the euro now, it could happen that they suffer the same fate than Croatia. That means from one day to another, bread is double, housing is double, stuff like this. And they really watching Croatia close. But we all know what happened in the election in Romania. And if you take Bulgaria, Romania, and Poland, you see what the EU does. And this comes back to the German leadership of defense or rearm Europe. It's the Ostflanke. What is that in English?
The eastern flank, like the military part of it. But for those who do not know what happened in Romania, just let us recapitulate that just for a very brief time. Romania just held elections. And after the results of those elections were unfavorable for the so-called European Union, they were cancelled by the Supreme Court of Romania, which is more or less under the control of the European Union. And the winner of these elections, the president that they did not want to have, he was barred and exempt from competing in the elections that had to be repeated. And a former functionary of the EU, Thierry Breton, a Frenchman with a Senegalese passport because he does not want to pay taxes in France, he said that if elections turn out the way the EU does not want them to turn out, they will just do what they did in Romania. So they openly admitted that they canceled these elections, which kind of easily explains how US Vice President J.D. Vance and his advisor Samuel Sampson see the EU as a tyranny and as an undemocratic structure. So this is an open manipulation of these elections. It's openly anti-democratic, and that is what people in Bulgaria too see. But we have to, Hermann, we have to explain the present situation of the euro, this European currency, because Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, she calls herself a president, which she is not. Actually, she was never voted in office by the people, and the EU is not a nation. Ursula von der Leyen 1999 flanked this news bit of Bulgaria being allowed now. That is the official phrasing, because the European Commission has now decided to allow Bulgaria to introduce the euro. She flanked that with the comment that the euro is the currency of stability and our common goals and values within the European Union. You as a banker, what is the present state, the financial state of the euro?
I can tell you, I was a very young banker in 1992. There was a contract of Maastricht, which basically set or should have set the goals, which country is allowed to come into the euro. And that had something to do with the debt to GDP ratio. So basically, how much debt are the countries carrying? And I can tell you, including Germany, from this day on, there is not one single country that actually fulfills all the criteria for this contract. So basically, what we see is that also with Bulgaria, and here again, they are on the upswing, but still, to be part of a supposedly strong currency, you cannot import weak countries that are not economically there yet in terms of, what they produce, what the inner system is. And I think the European Union is desperate to get all these countries and basically build their own eastern flank and say, oh yeah, you see, this is why Russia is mad, because when the US dollar falls, we will become the world currency, which is a dream, because why can the euro never work? And we highlighted that numerous times since basically 1990, since the first idea of a common currency, which was first called ECU. So basically that was the predecessor of the euro, who was introduced in 1990, end of 99. And so basically what we have seen then is that the purchasing power against the euro is down something like 88 or 90%. So it has never fulfilled what it should have done. And the reason behind it economically is a situation in Finland economically is much different than an economic system in Greece or Spain or Italy. The culture is different. The people think different in terms of what is their saving? Do they own their home? What kind of business can be done? And I had beautiful Greek colleagues, and I can tell you, working in Athens in August is almost impossible because it's so freaking hot that you can feel that the productivity during the afternoon goes down because everything slows down. So looking at simple things like this is, of course, propaganda. Like, we are strengthening the currency by importing Bulgaria and Croatia, who are great countries in itself, but I think will wake up, or in terms of Croatia, have woken up already and say, oh my God, this is not what we were promised. I mean, talk to a normal trader, a vegetable trader on a market in Croatia. They're not happy. So, it's another force of people pushing together. And we have seen that in Yugoslavia. We have seen that in Yugoslavia, that political force to bring people together and stick together will explode sooner or later. Same with the euro.
But from a financial perspective, what's the strategy there with introducing more and more countries into the euro? If you more or less said, if I understand you correctly, the euro failed. It failed not only to achieve the goals set for itself, it failed as a currency. It's continually losing its worth. So what's the strategy behind there? Just let it grow until it's too big to fail, or what's the plan there?
Well, that is the plan. But let's look at Holland, Germany, Luxembourg maybe as a small country. If they starting to be economical wise suffering, you have to basically lower the interest rates. That is a common myth, that if you, as a central bank, you lower the rates, then there is investment, then you revive the economy. But Greece and Italy and Spain and all the southern countries, basically for them, the interest rates are way too low. And we see the effects. The real estate market goes through the roof. The spending goes through the roof. If Greece would have to pay 10% on their government bonds and instead can issue at 3%, what do you think they do? They take 3 times the amount, And so if you look at the German situation in terms of debt to GDP ratio, so the debt level, We are officially above 72, 73%. But if you look at German pensions and all this, we are close to 400%. So also, it's a lie. And if we look at the southern countries, then it's even more obvious that all this brings us to an unsustainable debt level, exactly what we see in the States, where Elon Musk just dropped out of the White House saying, this beautiful big bill is nothing else than the destruction of America. Because at one point, and we see that in America already, the interest rate payment goes parabolic. And the US now takes every 100 days another $1 trillion of debt. Unsustainable. Any kind of math, any kind of basic knowledge, any kind of Excel sheet knowledge can give you the answer in less than 2 minutes. It's impossible to go through.
So, while the United States obviously has the plan to, yes, solve this debt crisis in another way, quite obviously, the European Union regimes have decided to solve their debt crisis by starting a war with Russia. That would be my conclusion as a non-financial expert.
Exactly. If in history ever, and if you look at before the Second World War, if the debt level reaches a certain level, the easiest way out is a war. And the people who die have nothing to do with the people who take the decision. And that's the bad part. And I think being on this unsustainable path ties into all the warmongering. And we know, for example, that the US aid, what Elon Musk really brought to light, the kind of corruption, the kind of payments to the outside world, now Brussels and Berlin say, we can take this over. So basically, we are not solving the problem. We are just shifting it from the US to Europe. And that means the divide between the US and Europe, not only in terms of freedom of speech and what J.D. Vance mentioned in the Munich Security Conference, in any respect, it's different. And I think, to be honest, America first is not a bad sign, because we should say Germany first. And if there is a strong Germany, there could be a stronger Europe, but it doesn't happen, because Germany now goes basically to, how should I say, all the reserves are taken. And the only way out for the leadership here not to be responsible is basically going into a war, unfortunately.
Yeah, and while the deep state is obviously continuing its path to war with the European Union, Germany at the same time continues to fuel its migrant invasion. Apollo News writes that it's Wild West on Berlin street. That is a quote from a police union spokesman sharply criticizing the politics in Germany's capital after yet another stabbing. The chairman, Bodo Pfalzgraf, says there are untenable conditions for the citizens of the city and for our colleagues in the police force. He continues, are we going to keep debating, or are we finally going to tackle the causes? A very good question, Hermann. The present German Chancellor Friedrich Merz came into office after promising that he will deliver what he calls a Asylwende, so a turnaround in the migration politics. That was his big promise. Fact of the matter is that nothing, really nothing, actually happened after his takeover, except for a big symbolic gesture, because he instantly made his Secretary of the Interior, who's responsible for border politics, made this secretary order the border police to now turn down illegal immigrants at the border, and nothing happened afterwards, although they had these very media installed, or the media hype around this command to the border forces. The actual rate of deflections decreased by under 20%, and now we experience something, or we see something in Germany that reminds us yet again of US situations where lawfare is breaking out over these symbolic gestures. News reports, the online outlet, there is a dispute over the rejections at the borders after a Berlin Green Party member affiliated judge and a former member of a left-wing extremist group ruled over these still only minor changes that Merz made. News writes, his close ties to the Green Party are already known. News research now shows that this judge was also close to the far-left group calling himself Jugenddemokraten, like Young Democrats and Young Left. The judge by the name of Florian von Allemann just ruled that even these symbolic gestures that led to only a little under 20% of it are illegal, end quote, and must be stopped immediately. So, Hermann, now we have a situation in Germany, again comparable to the US, where we have a court ruling from a district court in Berlin just outlawing the rejections of illegal immigrants at the border, altogether with the government promising that they will continue their politics of strict rejections, which never have been strict rejections to begin with. It's quite a messed up situation there.
Now it's pretty clear, in my view, it's exactly what they want. You know, and now everybody turns around and says, "Oh, but the court, and we have to go through the courts." And you see the three pillars of power, they work because the court can basically control and undermine the government's decision. But the worst example that we have here, and we remember Angela Merkel's words saying in the German Bundestag, in the German parliament in end of 2015, she said, what we have to do is we have to change illegal migration to legal migration. And that means she influenced the courts. And if you say this guy who just basically put the verdict on and is part of the Greens or very close to the left, of course he's pro migration. But the worst of all is that at the border, the reason why this popped up in Frankfurt Oder, which is the deepest part of Eastern Germany, very close to
the Polish border, yeah,
the Polish border, exactly. 3 Syrians, 2 men and 1 woman, were basically awaited by NGOs who supported them.
There were Somalis, sorry, not Syrians, there were Somalis.
Oh, Somalis.
But the rest is correct, yeah.
Yeah. So basically they were waiting already. And this is part of the US aid. This is part of the Rearm Europe. This is part of the we protect our power. Because now they have an excuse to say, we wanted to do everything. We actually wanted to be super strict on migration, but...
Which they were not to begin with. Again, sorry for interrupting you. Let me stress that. They had these symbolic gestures when they took over power. Friedrich Merz declared, now we will have the turnaround. And it never was a turnaround to begin with, because it was merely a symbolic gesture of his Secretary of the Interior ordering the police to do something that led to only a little under 20% of reduction.
Absolutely. And you know, his last couple of very strong promises before the election were towards migration, which is the Germans' biggest fear and interest. So very, very clear, week before the election, he said, on my first day, basically like Donald Trump with the executive orders, I will sit in the office and I will close borders. So of course, we will never know how many people at that point thought, you know what, I should vote for Merz. I don't have to vote for the AfD because he just said he will clearly, on his first day, close the borders. Yeah. And you know, Angela Merkel said already, the difference between what politician says before the election and after is quite big, and we don't have to do what we said before. But that is the situation of Germany. We lie constantly about everything to any subject, and therefore the people are confused. And I think the public media that we just mentioned is also in absolutely state of brainwashing the people, everybody who watches these programs, which is a large part of the German population, given our demographic development. So we have way more older people, and they actually decided the last election. They looked at Merz and they said, oh, he looks promising. I think he's going to keep his word. And again,
because that is what state-controlled media told them. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, if you think that this is remarkable, having this left-wing extremist-affiliated judge issuing this verdict and the government just actually sticking to it, you have not heard the complete story. Because as Junge Freiheit writes here, it's also remarkable how the case, which was brought to court by the left-wing organization Pro-Asylum, ended up on the desk of Judge von Allemans, who, according to other reports, is now a member of the Green Party. Initially, Junge Freiheit writes, jurisdiction shifted from the administrative court in Frankfurt Oder to the one in Berlin, where he presides, because the federal police headquarters are located there in Berlin. The case then went on to another complicated journey until it finally reached Judge von Allemann. When the Somalis' complaint arrived in Berlin, it first went to a single judge. She passed it on to the 28th chamber because she felt that she alone could not decide on a matter of such, quote, fundamental importance. Surprisingly, however, this chamber declared that it did not have jurisdiction, even though it was responsible for asylum cases from Somalia, the country of origin. The reason given was that the asylum application had not yet been submitted. Suddenly, the 6th chamber, where von Allemann presides, was responsible. Von Allemann had advocated a very generous asylum policy very early on and then repeatedly, and he had also written texts on this effect. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you, Hermann, and thank you out there. This wraps up this issue of EuroWars. Join us next week for your breakdown of politics and money in the deep state hellhole that is the so-called European Union.